The great hall of the Galactic Council glittered like 1,000 suns. Beams of blue light ran along the ceiling, and the gathered delegates from every known world sat in long, curved rows that surrounded the center floor. It was supposed to be a place of unity, of progress, but that day it felt heavy, like the whole chamber was waiting to explode. In the middle stood the Terran ambassador, a calm figure wrapped in a dark uniform that carried no rank marks, only the simple emblem of Earth. Across from him hovered the Threxian delegate, Ambassador Raal, a tall insect-like being with silver eyes that reflected every flicker of light. He was the one chosen to deliver the Council's decision. For weeks the Council had debated behind closed doors. Reports had poured in from the outer systems. Human fleets expanding, colonies appearing on disputed worlds, trade networks stretching across sectors that used to belong to older races. To some it was impressive. To others it was threatening. Humanity had been part of the Council for only 50 years, and yet their technology, their ambition, and their unity had shaken the balance that had existed for centuries. The oldest members of the Council had seen empires rise and fall, but none had risen as quickly as the Terrans. They were everywhere, trading, exploring, and most of all, building. They had rebuilt barren moons into shipyards, turned frozen asteroids into mining colonies, and built fleets that even the most advanced worlds quietly envied. It was too much, too fast, and too unpredictable. The Council decided they had to draw a line. When Raal finally spoke, his voice carried through every translator in the hall, smooth and polite but cold underneath. By order of the Galactic Council, he said, the Terran Empire is to cease all military expansion beyond its home sector. All colonies established within the last 10 cycles are to be relinquished to neutral oversight. Furthermore, Earth's Navy is to reduce its active combat fleet to defensive levels within 1 cycle standard. Failure to comply will result in sanctions, trade restrictions, and, if required, direct enforcement. The words hung in the air like a blade. The crowd stirred. Soft murmurs, the hum of translators, the faint sound of claws tapping metal tables. The Terran ambassador didn't move. He didn't argue or raise his voice. He just stood there, eyes steady, waiting for Raal to finish reading the decree. And let it be clear, Raal added, his silver eyes narrowing, that the Council's patience has limits. Peace is only possible through obedience to shared law. For a moment no one spoke. Even the usual buzz of whispers stopped. The humans were known for their directness, for always having something to say, but now they were silent. It made the room uncomfortable. Every delegate leaned forward a little, waiting for the Terran to react, perhaps to plead or to promise compliance. Instead, the ambassador simply nodded once. His face gave away nothing, no anger, no fear. Only calm. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear enough that every translator picked it up perfectly. Noted, he said. The Empire will respond. And with that he turned and left the hall. The silence that followed was strange and uneasy. Raal looked around, unsure if he should feel triumphant or afraid. The Council chairperson, an elder from the Orel species, finally broke the stillness by striking the ceremonial chime and declaring the session closed. Delegates began to leave, some shaking their heads, others whispering among themselves. In the days that followed, the story spread through every news network across the galaxy. The Council stands firm. Terrans ordered to disarm. Earth faces isolation. Analysts and politicians spoke with confidence that humanity would bow to pressure. After all, no single species had ever stood against the combined power of the Galactic Council. But among those who had met humans before, traders, explorers, soldiers, there was less confidence. They remembered how humans had acted during past disputes. When threatened, they didn't shout. They didn't beg. They just prepared. Back on Earth, the response was nothing like the Council expected. The message from the Council arrived at the Terran capital through official channels. The Emperor, whose name few outside Earth even knew, read the ultimatum in silence. Around him sat members of the High Command, engineers, and economic leaders. None spoke until he looked up. They believe, he said slowly, that we will kneel because they have the numbers. They forget what built us. They forget that we came from a world that tried to kill us every day, and we learned to build cities anyway. The Council had mistaken silence for fear. But in human culture, silence could mean many things: respect, patience, or more dangerously, preparation. Factories on Mars began to operate at full capacity. The lunar shipyards shifted production schedules. Supply convoys vanished from public tracking systems. Even civilian stations noticed unusual traffic from military vessels that never filed flight plans. The galaxy saw only fragments of what was happening, and most dismissed it as panic. Within the Terran networks, an encrypted message spread quietly through every level of command. It carried only a short phrase: "Prepare for response." The outer colonies received new orders. Fleet officers checked and rechecked every combat protocol. The science divisions, which had been experimenting with stealth drives and advanced kinetic weapons, suddenly found themselves under military authority. Yet despite all the movement, no one outside the Empire knew exactly what was being built. The Council, meanwhile, celebrated what they believed was a victory. They thought humanity had gone silent because they were afraid to answer. The ambassadors congratulated each other, praising the decision as a moment of galactic unity. Raal himself gave a speech to his people, claiming that the Terrans had finally realized their limits. But inside the Terran systems, people remembered history differently. They remembered the times when Earth had been told to stay down, by nature, by wars, by famine, and how each time they rose higher. It wasn't pride that drove them. It was survival, pure and simple. The Council thought they could tame the humans through law and threat. They didn't understand that humanity didn't rise because of permission. They rose because no one ever gave them any. A week later, the Terran Emperor appeared in a recorded broadcast sent to every colony, every ship, and every citizen. The message was simple, spoken from a plain room without symbols or ceremony. "We sought peace," he said. "We built our home among the stars with open hands. We traded fairly honored treaties and believed that respect could build unity. But when peace demands submission, it is no longer peace, it is control. The Council has given us a choice between silence and dignity. We choose dignity. Let them see what humanity's silence truly means." That speech became known as the response. It spread faster than any signal before it, echoing across human and alien networks alike. Even those who feared the Empire felt a strange shiver when they heard the tone in his voice. Not rage, but certainty. While the Council drafted plans for enforcement fleets, the Terrans finalized something else entirely. Their intelligence units had already infiltrated the Council's communication relays, their AIs listening and learning. Every strategic move, every secret message, every order from the Council's command center, Earth already knew it. The Council thought they had time to prepare. They didn't. Humanity had already begun moving pieces on the board long before the ultimatum was even delivered, and so the stage was set. The Council believed the situation was under control, that they had forced the young Terran Empire to bend. But deep inside the quiet hum of Terran space, under the soft blue glow of their shipyards, something vast was awakening. The Council had given their ultimatum. They thought it would bring peace. But to humanity, it was nothing more than a challenge. And when humans are challenged, history has shown only one outcome. They answer. They always answer. The galaxy waited. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no answer from the Terran Empire. The Council had sent its message, and now everyone expected the humans to come crawling back with apologies and promises. But instead, Earth went silent. No more messages. No trade convoys. No diplomats attending meetings. Nothing. The silence made the entire galactic network uneasy. At first, some found it amusing. A few reporters laughed on broadcasts, saying humanity was probably too embarrassed to face the Council again. Others claimed Earth was in chaos, arguing among itself about whether to resist or obey. But the laughter faded as time passed. The silence wasn't normal. It wasn't the sound of fear. It felt like the pause before something important. Across the stars, small hints began to appear. Patrol ships at the edge of human space reported unusual signals, fleets moving in tight formation, communication bursts encrypted beyond recognition. On the moons of Jupiter, observers saw bright flashes on the dark side like giant engines being tested. On Mars, satellites detected new structures rising from the red dust, massive towers with energy signatures unlike anything registered before. When asked, Earth's government gave no explanation. They didn't even deny it. They just didn't respond. Inside the Council chambers, tension was building. Some members wanted to believe that the Terrans were simply reorganizing. Others felt uneasy. The chairperson tried to calm them. reminding everyone that Earth had signed the treaties and was bound by law to obey. But deep down, even the most confident delegates knew that the humans had always followed their own logic, not anyone else's. In one private meeting, a nervous council aide whispered to his superior, "What if they're planning something?" The superior only shook his head and replied, "They wouldn't dare." Not against the entire galaxy, but the aide wasn't so sure. He had seen humans before, on trade stations during peace talks. He remembered how they listened quietly, how their expressions never gave away much. He remembered hearing a phrase humans liked to use when they felt underestimated. "Wait and see." Back on Earth, the quiet wasn't fear, it was focus. Every factory, every shipyard, every orbital dock was alive. The night skies over the Terran homeworld were filled with streaks of light as new ships took off for testing. Engineers worked without rest. Artificial intelligence networks ran simulations at speeds no other species could match. The Terran High Command had given only one instruction: prepare everything. The mood across human worlds was tense but unified. Ordinary citizens didn't panic. They didn't protest. They had seen this kind of silence before, during old wars, during moments when Earth had been pushed into corners. They knew that when their leaders said nothing, it meant that plans were already in motion. One journalist on a colony station described it perfectly in a private log. "It feels like the air itself is holding its breath. People aren't afraid, they're waiting. Factories hum day and night and no one complains. Every worker knows they're part of something big, though no one says it aloud." The council had no idea what was happening behind those silent transmission lines. They believed their threats had worked. In their grand chamber, Raal, the same Threxian ambassador who had delivered the ultimatum, was already preparing his next speech, a statement to declare victory and reaffirm the council's control. He didn't know that at that very moment. Human scouts were already mapping hyperspace routes near council space, studying patterns, recording defenses, and watching every movement. They weren't invading, not yet. They were learning. Weeks later, an event changed everything. A Terran transport ship, an old civilian vessel, crossed into a neutral zone near the edge of the council's authority. A small patrol of council enforcement ships intercepted it and ordered it to turn back. According to reports, the human captain complied without argument. The patrol logged it as a peaceful encounter. But then the ship didn't return to known Terran space. It simply vanished from scanners as if it had disappeared into thin air. Days later, another patrol reported strange readings near the same sector. Energy spikes, artificial signals, then nothing. The council dismissed it as sensor error. But the truth was simpler. The Terrans were testing something new. They were not preparing for open war. They were preparing to make sure if war ever started, it would end before the first battle even reached Earth. The Terran Emperor appeared again, not in a grand ceremony, but in a private meeting broadcast only to military command and government officials. His words were calm, not angry. "We will not strike first," he said, "but we will not be struck twice. The council wants to see strength. Let them see what restraint looks like when it carries power." The men and women listening didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They simply went back to their posts, their minds focused on duty. The next few days were quiet again, but not for long. On a cold morning in the capital, reports came in from Terran intelligence units spread across the galaxy. The council had voted to send an enforcement fleet to observe Earth's compliance with the ultimatum. It was a polite way of saying they were sending warships to intimidate the humans. The Emperor listened to the report and simply said, "Let them come." Those words were repeated across every Terran channel quietly, like an oath. When the council fleet departed from their central station, the galaxy's news channels broadcast it live. Massive ships, bright, polished, decorated with the council's crest, moving in perfect formation. Anchors described it as a peaceful enforcement action, meant to remind the Terrans of their place. On every human world, people watched the footage too. They didn't panic. They didn't shout. They just watched silently, eyes fixed on the screen. Some whispered to each other, "They really think we're afraid." In a shipyard orbiting Mars, a group of workers stood together during their break, looking up at the night sky through a viewing dome. The stars looked peaceful, endless. One of them finally spoke, breaking the long silence. "They think we're quiet because we're scared," he said softly. "They don't know we're quiet because we're ready." The others nodded, and no one said another word. Inside the Council fleet, officers were relaxed. Their commanders had told them the humans would never resist. The mission was routine: fly near Earth, scan the system, and wait for the humans to issue an apology. They didn't realize the humans already knew every one of their coordinates. Terran AI systems had cracked into the Council's communication grid days before the fleet even launched. Every ship's route, every transmission, every order. The Terrans saw it all. The Council's greatest fleet was walking straight into a trap, and they didn't even know it. But the trap wasn't meant to destroy. Not yet. The Terrans had something else in mind. They wanted to send a message. As the fleet drew closer to Terran space, the signals they sent began to echo strangely. Their long-range scans picked up faint distortions, ghost signals, as if someone were copying their transmissions and sending them back. The commanders were confused. Their technicians said it was just interference. Then their main navigation systems blinked. For 3 seconds, every screen in the fleet went dark. When they came back online, the ships were still on course, but their systems had been altered. A message appeared on every display. No sound, no voice, just 3 words in bright white letters. "We are listening." The commanders immediately tried to contact the Council headquarters. The line was dead. Their secondary channels were silent. Even their emergency frequencies were jammed. For the first time, fear spread through the fleet. They weren't being attacked, but they were completely cut off. Something was controlling every part of their network. Back at the Council headquarters, they had no idea. To them, everything looked normal. Their fleet was still sending automated updates, all of them positive. They didn't realize those updates were being faked, generated by Terran algorithms that had already taken over their communication feed. To the public, it looked like peace. To the humans, it was the calm before something much larger. The Terran Empire wasn't rushing. They never rushed. Every move was planned, deliberate, patient. For now, the Council still believed it had control. The news still called Earth a minor problem. The delegates still congratulated themselves on their diplomatic strength. But somewhere deep in the endless black between stars, the Terran fleets were forming ranks, silent and invisible. And through the quiet hum of space, one unspoken truth was beginning to spread. The humans were no longer reacting. They were preparing to respond. The Council fleet drifted through deep space, glowing like a moving city of lights. Thousands of soldiers, pilots, and technicians worked calmly under orders, confident that their mission would be easy. They were, after all, representing the entire Galactic Council, an alliance of hundreds of species, each contributing ships and technology. How could one world possibly stand against that? The commanders had been told that the Terrans would likely surrender the moment they saw the fleet approaching. No one expected a fight. Some even joked that the humans might send a formal apology before the fleet even entered orbit. But the truth was, the Terran Empire already knew exactly where every one of those ships was. In a quiet operations center deep beneath the surface of Mars, rows of screens displayed live data feeds, Council fleet positions, communication logs, and sensor pings. Human operators watched silently as their systems traced the enemy's path across hyperspace. Artificial intelligence programs whispered calculations in the background, adjusting probabilities and routes. Every move of the Council fleet had already been predicted. One officer leaned forward, eyes focused on the center display. "They're entering the Eris belt," he said softly. Just like the simulations, the senior commander didn't look surprised. He simply replied, "Then it begins." The Eris belt was a stretch of space filled with floating rock and ice, an old mining zone that had been abandoned years ago. It looked empty and harmless from a distance. The perfect place for the Council fleet to travel through without suspicion. But hidden among those silent asteroids were Terran stealth ships. They had been waiting for days, motionless, their hulls coated with dark materials that absorbed all light and energy signatures. Even the best sensors in the galaxy couldn't detect them. Inside one of those ships, the crew sat in complete silence. The captain's voice came softly over the comms. "Remember," he said, "no one fires unless ordered. We only respond if they engage." The Council fleet entered the field right on schedule. Thousands of scanners swept across the rocks, but they found nothing unusual. The commanders were relaxed, confident. They didn't realize that dozens of Terran ships were watching every one of their movements, like wolves observing a herd that had wandered too close. For a while, Nothing happened. Just the soft hum of engines and the steady blinking of lights. Then, the first strange reading appeared on the Council flagship's sensors. "Captain, I'm detecting fluctuations in our navigation grid," an officer reported. "Probably interference from the belt," the captain said, waving it off, but the interference grew stronger. Systems flickered. One by one, the fleet's communication lines began to lose signal. Then, without warning, the main view screens on every ship went black for 2 seconds. When they came back online, a single line of text appeared in bright white letters across every display. "This is Terran space. Turn back." The bridge crews froze. No one moved. No one spoke. It wasn't a threat, but it felt like one. "Trace that signal," the captain ordered, but the signal had no origin. It came from everywhere at once. The captain tried to contact the Council command center, but all long-range channels were jammed. Their communication array, which was supposed to be shielded from interference, wasn't responding at all. The fleet had become deaf and blind, and they didn't even know how. Back on Earth, the Terran command center received confirmation. The trap was working perfectly. In a dark control room, a single figure stood watching the screen that displayed the entire belt. Small dots of light representing the Council fleet were surrounded by dozens of hidden Terran ships. Phase 1 complete, an officer reported quietly. The commander nodded. "Begin containment, no firing. Let them understand they're not in control." Across the belt, Terran ships began to activate special fields that distorted hyperspace signals. The Council fleet suddenly found their navigation systems showing impossible readings, planets appearing where none existed, false stars on the horizon, and distances shifting unpredictably. They had no idea that the humans had built the entire trap around advanced electronic warfare, not weapons. The Council fleet tried to regroup, but every time they moved, their path twisted back toward the same point, the heart of the belt, where a single Terran dreadnought now revealed itself. It emerged from the shadows like a mountain sliding out of fog. The ship was enormous, larger than any Council vessel, its surface dark and silent except for the faint blue glow of its engines. "Identify that ship," the captain on the Council flagship shouted. The system tried to scan it, but failed. The Terran dreadnought wasn't broadcasting any signal. It was completely dark, no name, no code, no registration. Just a shape moving slowly and deliberately toward them. The sight alone made the crews uneasy. Then the dreadnought sent a transmission. This time there was no text. No threats. Just a voice, calm, steady, unmistakably human. "Council fleet, you are trespassing in restricted space. Turn back now. No harm will come to you. Ignore this warning and your ships will be disabled." The voice ended. Silence followed. The Council captain's pride flared. "Disable? They dare threaten the Council fleet?" He barked, "Open a channel. I'll remind them who commands this galaxy." But when he tried to transmit, nothing happened. Their outgoing channel was blocked. The humans weren't listening anymore. They were controlling every frequency. For several long seconds, the two fleets faced each other in silence. The Council commander gave the order to advance. "Full power to shields. Move forward." The dreadnought didn't move. It just waited. Inside the Terran control room, the operators watched as the Council fleet crossed the invisible boundary line. One of them looked to his superior. "They've ignored the warning." The commander nodded slowly. "Then show them what a warning means." A signal was sent. Instantly, the Terran dreadnought released a wave of pure energy. Not an explosion, not a weapon, just a focused electromagnetic pulse. It spread like a ripple through space, invisible but powerful. On the Council ships, lights flickered. Shields dropped for a moment. Engines stuttered. Entire control panels went dark and rebooted. The crews panicked, shouting orders as systems failed one by one. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything returned to normal. But on every ship's main screen, a message appeared again. "You are guests. Leave while you can." The Council commander was furious now. "Weapons ready," he ordered. "Target that ship." His officers hesitated. "Sir, they haven't attacked us directly." "I said fire." The order went out. Dozens of bright energy blasts streaked across the belt toward the Terran dreadnought. They hit its hull directly, flashes of light, shockwaves rippling through the airless void. But when the glow faded, the dreadnought was still there, untouched. Not even a scratch. The Terran ship didn't return fire. It simply transmitted another message. Your weapons are ineffective. Please leave. This is your final warning. The message wasn't angry. It sounded almost calm, disappointed even. The council commander stared at the screen, realizing for the first time that the humans weren't bluffing. He turned to his officers, unsure of what to say. One young pilot whispered, "Sir, they're toying with us." Before anyone could respond, all weapon systems on every council ship went offline simultaneously. Lights dimmed. Alarms blared. The fleet had been completely disabled without a single shot fired by the Terrans. Then all at once the systems came back on. Every display now showed new coordinates, a safe route leading out of the belt. The voice returned one last time. "We do not wish for conflict, but we will defend our home. Go back to your council and tell them this. Humanity will not be threatened again." The message ended. The council fleet followed the coordinates without argument. No one wanted to test what would happen next. As they moved away, the Terran dreadnought turned slowly, vanishing back into the dark. By the time the fleet reached open space again, all their communication systems returned to normal. Their logs showed no sign of interference, no proof of what had just happened. But every crew member remembered. Back in the council chambers, the ambassadors waited impatiently for the fleet's report. When it finally came, the commanders struggled to explain. "No casualties," they said. "No attacks. But we were disabled." The delegates didn't believe it at first. How could humans shut down an entire fleet without firing a single weapon? But as the reports were confirmed, silence filled the hall. They had sent an ultimatum. Humanity had answered it, not with war, but with control. The council had wanted to prove power. Instead, they had revealed their weakness and far away. Deep within the quiet hum of Terran space, the humans prepared their next move. Not for revenge, but to make sure the galaxy finally understood Earth would no longer bow to anyone. The message from the returning council fleet spread across the galaxy faster than light. Every communication network, every news channel, and every private line whispered the same thing. The Terrans had faced the full power of the Galactic Council, and the Council had lost. No ships were destroyed, no shots returned, no visible battle at all. Yet the mighty enforcement fleet had been completely disabled and forced to retreat. To most species, it sounded impossible. To others, it sounded terrifying. The official report claimed the Terran Empire had used advanced electronic interference. But the soldiers who had been there told the story differently. They spoke of a single massive human warship appearing out of nowhere, of screens going dark, of systems dying without cause. They said they had felt something, not just power but control, as if every part of their ship had suddenly belonged to someone else. The council tried to suppress those stories. They called them exaggerations and rumors, but the truth was already out. The council's ultimatum had backfired, and now, every world in the galaxy knew it. Inside the council chambers, chaos replaced confidence. Delegates shouted at each other, accusing one another of weakness, of misjudgment, of fear. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others argued that fighting the Terrans now would lead to total disaster. "They didn't even attack," one delegate cried. "They simply showed us they could. Don't you see what that means?" Ral, the Threxian ambassador who had once delivered the ultimatum to Earth, sat silently through the shouting. His hands trembled slightly. He remembered the human ambassador's calm face, that simple line, "The Empire will respond." He had thought it was arrogance. Now he understood it had been a warning. The council eventually voted to send a diplomatic team to Earth to restore relations, but deep down everyone knew it was too late. On Earth, the response to the council's retreat was quiet, almost solemn. There were no celebrations, no cheering in the streets, no loud victory speeches. Instead, the Empire focused on rebuilding what mattered. Trade fleets that had gone silent during the tension began to move again. Human colonies reopened communication lines with neighboring worlds. Relief ships were sent to frontier systems that had suffered from the Council's trade restrictions. To the outside galaxy, it looked like mercy. To the humans, it was just their way of saying, "We take care of our own first." In the capital, the Emperor met with his advisors behind closed doors. The War Council sat in near silence as data scrolled across the room's main display. Lists of alien worlds, trade routes, and council-controlled regions. "They underestimated us," one of the senior officers said quietly. Now they'll never make that mistake again. The Emperor nodded. Good, but we don't rule through fear. We rule through proof. Let them see what order looks like when it's not built on arrogance. He turned to the room, his voice calm and deliberate. It's time for the Council to understand what responsibility means. A few days later, strange things began happening across the galaxy. Council stations that had gone silent during the chaos suddenly found their systems fixed, repaired remotely by Terran technicians. Failing satellites started broadcasting again, using Terran encryption codes. Food shipments that had been delayed by the Council's disorganization suddenly arrived on time, escorted by human ships that claimed to be on humanitarian duty. At first, the Council resisted the help. But the other world, the smaller, struggling ones, were quick to accept. They needed supplies. They needed stability. They didn't care if it came from the Council or from Earth. Within weeks, entire sectors of the galaxy were functioning under Terran supervision, even though no official announcement had been made. The Council's own citizens began turning to human representatives for assistance, bypassing their old leaders. The shift wasn't sudden or violent. It was quiet, smooth, like a tide slowly pulling everything in one direction. In the Council headquarters, panic was growing. We can't let them take over like this. One delegate shouted. They're replacing us without firing a single weapon. Another delegate replied bitterly. They don't need to fire. Their ships move faster. Their systems are smarter. Their people don't argue every minute like we do. A few called for negotiations with Earth, but others refused, afraid it would make the Council look weak. So instead, they tried to restrict Terran aid efforts, blocking trade, freezing accounts, cutting communication links. It didn't work. Every time they closed one route, humans opened two more. Their trade fleets slipped through unmonitored zones. Their encrypted channels carried messages faster than any Council system could track, and every blockade only made the galaxy's smaller worlds angrier at the Council. They feed us when you won't, one planetary governor said during a broadcast. Maybe the Council has rules, but the humans have hearts. That statement spread everywhere. It was simple, but it carried weight. By the end of the month, the Terran Empire's presence was felt in every corner of the galaxy. Their ambassadors replaced old Council envoys. Their fleets patrolled trade lanes not as conquerors but as protectors. And yet the Council still refused to accept that they had lost control. Finally, the Terran Emperor issued a message to the entire galaxy. It was short and formal, but every word carried power. We do not seek dominion. We seek balance. The Council has failed its duty to protect life and maintain peace. If they will not act, we will. That single message changed everything. Some species immediately sided with Earth, declaring allegiance to the Terran Empire. Others stayed quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. But no one dared challenge the humans directly. Not after what happened in the Eris Belt. On one Council world, a historian wrote, "The humans have done something no empire has ever done before. They conquered without conquering." And he was right. The Terrans hadn't needed armies or destruction. They simply showed the galaxy that they were capable of doing what the Council had failed to do: bring order, efficiency, and fairness. When Council-controlled worlds compared life under their rule to life under Terran supervision, the choice became obvious. Trade improved. Piracy declined. Energy shortages disappeared. The humans worked quietly, efficiently, without demanding worship or tribute. That was what made them truly dangerous. They didn't want power for glory. They wanted results. The turning point came when the Council tried one final move in a desperate attempt to regain authority. They sent a broadcast declaring that all Terran fleets operating outside their home sector were acting illegally and must withdraw immediately. Earth's response arrived less than an hour later. Every communication terminal across the galaxy received a synchronized message. It wasn't from a diplomat or even the Emperor. It came from the Central Terran AI, a system that oversaw their entire interstellar network. The message was calm, almost polite. Acknowledged. Terran fleets will continue operations as long as they are requested by local populations. We act under invitation, not invasion. If the Council believes otherwise, they are free to prove it peacefully. That final word, peacefully, carried more weight than a fleet of warships. The Council had nothing left to say. They knew the people of the galaxy supported Earth now. To move against the humans would mean turning against the very citizens they claimed to protect. One by one, council members began to resign. Worlds that had been loyal for centuries withdrew from the organization and signed new treaties with Earth. The Galactic Council was crumbling, not because humans destroyed it, but because humanity had simply become the better alternative. Meanwhile, in the Terran capital, life went on. The Emperor continued his usual duties, holding meetings, approving plans, expanding colonies. When asked by one of his advisors whether they should formally dissolve the council, he shook his head. "No," he said softly, "we don't need to end it. They'll end themselves. Our actions will speak louder than any declaration." And he was right. Within a few months, the council stopped holding meetings altogether. The chamber that had once been filled with loud voices and endless arguments now stood empty. Lights dimmed, chairs abandoned. On its wall still hung the old symbol of unity, a circle of stars representing every world in the galaxy. But in the center of the hall, someone had quietly placed a small metallic emblem, the symbol of Earth. No one claimed responsibility. No one removed it either. In the end, there was no war, no destruction, no bloodshed. The Terran Empire hadn't taken control by force. They had simply taken responsibility. And that was something far more powerful. Across the stars, people began to refer to the event as the silent takeover. The galaxy didn't fall to humanity. It simply followed them, because when everyone else fought over power, humans built solutions. The Emperor's final address to the people was short and quiet, spoken from a simple podium overlooking the blue curve of Earth. They told us to disarm. We built peace instead. They wanted us to submit. We showed them how to stand. The galaxy doesn't need rulers. It needs those who act when others talk. And if that is our destiny, then so be it. The recording ended there. But the message lived on, passed through generations, translated into hundreds of languages, repeated whenever someone asked how Earth had come to lead the stars. Because the truth was simple. When the Council issued their ultimatum, they believed humanity would bend. But instead, humanity reminded the galaxy of something. The fall of the Galactic Council didn't happen in a single day. It was slow, like the quiet cracking of ice under pressure, silent at first, then unstoppable once it began. World after world began withdrawing from the Council, claiming independence or aligning themselves with the Terran Empire. At first, the Council leaders tried to act as if it didn't matter. They said it was just temporary, that the situation would stabilize soon. But everyone knew the truth. The galaxy was changing, and Earth was at the center of that change. On the outer colonies, far from the bright lights of the core worlds, life started improving almost overnight. Trade lanes that had been abandoned for years suddenly reopened under Terran protection. Human freighters arrived with supplies, medical help, and engineers. They didn't make speeches. They didn't demand loyalty. They just worked. The people noticed. A miner on a small frontier planet told a news reporter, "The Council sent us rules. The humans sent us food." That one line went viral across the galaxy. It said everything that needed to be said. Within months, the Terran flag, simple silver and blue, was flying quietly beside the local banners of dozens of worlds. Not as conquerors, but as partners. Back on Earth, the Emperor was calm as always. He didn't see this as conquest. He saw it as responsibility. In his office overlooking the curve of the planet, he watched the stars through the wide glass panels. His advisors were talking about trade numbers, defense networks, and new alliances, but his attention was elsewhere. He finally spoke after a long silence. "Power is easy to take," he said softly. "The real challenge is to hold it without becoming what we replaced." Those words stayed with everyone in the room. The Terran Empire wasn't built on domination. It was built on discipline. Humanity had learned from its own history, from centuries of war, greed, and mistakes. They knew what unchecked power could do. That was why the Emperor constantly reminded his people, "We are not here to rule. We are here to lead by example." Meanwhile, in the ruins of the old council chamber, what remained of the delegates argued endlessly. Some wanted to rebuild the council under a new name. Others wanted to flee to distant sectors and start their own governments. But the truth was, no one listened to them anymore. Their ships were old, their systems outdated, their influence gone. One by one, their communication lines went silent. No one cared what the council said. The galaxy had already chosen its new leader. Still, a few of the more stubborn members refused to give up. They called Earth an imperialist power, accusing it of manipulation and control. But even their own people ignored them. On those same worlds, human engineers were fixing energy grids and water systems. Terran doctors were treating diseases the council had ignored for decades. People didn't listen to words anymore. They looked at results. Out in space, the Terran fleets became a symbol of hope. They didn't fly in formation like traditional military ships. Instead, they moved in coordinated patterns, like a living network, each vessel supporting the other, each ready to respond anywhere in seconds. A single distress call could bring a Terran patrol within minutes. Pirates disappeared. Trade routes reopened. Civilian ships began painting protected by Terran fleet on their hulls, even without formal permission, and the humans didn't mind. Because to them, peace was more than the absence of war. It was the presence of order and fairness. But not everyone accepted this new reality. A group of former council generals formed an alliance of their own, a desperate coalition of old powers who still believed they could restore the council's dominance. They called themselves the Restoration Pact. They gathered fleets, built new ships, and spread propaganda claiming Earth's rise was a threat to galactic freedom. For a while, some worlds believed them. Fear is powerful, especially when it's dressed as patriotism. But the Terran Empire didn't respond with anger or panic. They simply waited. They knew fear doesn't last forever, and not when truth is stronger. Still, when the Restoration Pact attacked a Terran convoy near the border of the Orion Arm, everything changed. It wasn't a massive battle, just one human transport ship carrying medical supplies to a frontier world. The attackers believed it would be easy prey, but what they didn't know was that the Terran fleet had been tracking them for weeks. When the packed ships fired, their weapons didn't work. Their engines shut down. Their targeting systems froze. Within seconds, their ships were dead in space. Then, out of the void, a single Terran battleship appeared. It didn't fire a single shot. Instead, a calm voice broadcast across all channels. "You have attacked a humanitarian convoy. This act violates galactic law and human ethics. Your systems are disabled. No lives will be taken today. You will be escorted to trial." Every ship in that sector heard it. The message spread faster than light, echoing through every news feed and transmission network. It wasn't a threat. It was justice, carried out with quiet precision. Even the enemies of Earth couldn't deny the discipline behind it. The captured pact leaders were tried publicly. The trial wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. The humans didn't shout or humiliate them. They simply presented the evidence calm and clear. The galaxy watched as the truth unfolded, how the pact had lied, manipulated, and plotted attacks to keep their own power alive. By the time the verdict was read, even their supporters turned away in shame. That trial became a symbol, a line in history where the galaxy understood that Earth didn't act from ego or pride. They acted from principle, and principles, unlike power, could not be destroyed. Months passed. The Terran Empire continued to grow, not through conquest but through cooperation. They built joint research centers with alien scientists. They opened their academies to students from every world. They even formed an interspecies council, not like the old one, full of corruption and politics, but a new assembly where each voice mattered equally. The difference was simple. This time, the humans didn't sit above anyone. They sat with everyone. One alien diplomat said during a broadcast, "The council wanted obedience. The Terrans want progress," and that line became the motto of a new age. But deep down, not everyone on Earth was at peace. Some within the military feared that the Empire was growing too soft, that mercy could be mistaken for weakness. They wanted to remind the galaxy that humanity was still capable of strength. The Emperor listened to their concerns carefully. Then he gave a simple answer. "Strength is not in what we destroy. It's in what we choose to protect." His words carried through the ranks like a wave. And just like that, the doubts faded, because even the soldiers of the Terran Empire knew they weren't fighting for power anymore. They were fighting for a galaxy that had once feared them, and now slowly had begun to trust them. One evening, on a small colony world orbiting a red sun, A child asked a Terran officer, "Why do humans help us? You don't even live here." The officer smiled gently. "Because once we needed help too. And someone helped us. We just don't want anyone to feel forgotten." That moment, a simple, quiet, captured everything the Terran Empire stood for. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about control. It was about never repeating the mistakes of the past. The more the galaxy saw of Earth, the more it realized something profound. Humanity wasn't special because of their technology or power. They were special because they remembered what it felt like to struggle, to lose, to hope. While other species had lived in comfort for centuries, humans had fought to survive on a dangerous, unpredictable planet. They had built empathy through pain, wisdom through mistakes, and unity through chaos. And now that same spirit had spread across the stars. By the end of that year, the Galactic Council was nothing more than a page in history. The Terran Empire had taken its place, not as rulers but as guardians. They called the new system the Galactic Accord, a partnership of equal worlds. Its headquarters stood not on Earth but on a neutral planet chosen by all, a symbol that this time, no single world held power over the others. Still, the galaxy knew who had made it possible. Every planet carried the same quiet respect for the humans, the species that had once been threatened, underestimated and pushed aside, yet rose higher than anyone could have imagined. And they rose not by fear, but by dignity. Late one night, the Emperor stood on the balcony of his residence, looking out at the endless stars. The sky shimmered with the light of 1,000 worlds. Worlds now bound together not by chains but by trust. An aide approached quietly. "Sir, the last of the Council archives have been sealed. What should we do with them?" The Emperor didn't turn around. He just looked at the stars a little longer and said, "Keep them. Let the next generation read them. They must know what happens when pride replaces purpose." The aide nodded and left, and the Emperor stood alone for a while longer, listening to the hum of the city below, knowing that history had turned a page. The galaxy was no longer ruled by ultimatums or fear. It was guided by understanding, built on the simple idea that strength means nothing without compassion, and at the heart of it all, humanity had found its true place, not above others, but among them. Because in the end, when the Council's ultimatum backfired, it didn't just awaken the Terran Empire's power. It awakened its conscience, and that more than anything changed the universe forever. Years passed. The galaxy had changed completely. Where once there had been fear, there was now calm. Where chaos had ruled, there was now order. The Terran Empire had done what no one thought possible. They had brought unity without war, peace without oppression, and progress without arrogance. But for the humans, it wasn't about glory. It was about purpose. The old wounds of the Council's betrayal had healed, replaced by quiet cooperation between worlds that had once been divided. The stars, once symbols of distance and difference, had become part of a shared sky. Everywhere you went, from the bright trade stations in the core systems to the quiet farms on frontier colonies, there were signs of change. Children of different species studied together. Ships of every shape and color carried the same insignia, a silver circle representing unity and trust. No one called it an empire anymore. It was simply known as the Accord. On Earth, life had settled into something peaceful. The capital wasn't a fortress like the Council once kept. It was open, full of gardens, public plazas, and halls where anyone could walk in and speak freely. Humans believed that real leadership didn't hide behind walls. The Emperor, older now, wiser, often walked those halls quietly. He wasn't treated like a distant ruler but like a respected teacher. People would greet him with simple smiles, not fear. He liked that. One morning he stood before a group of young students visiting from distant planets. They were curious, wide-eyed, full of questions about how humanity had changed the galaxy. A small alien child asked him, "Why did you fight the Council if you didn't want to rule?" The Emperor smiled. His voice was gentle when he replied. "We didn't fight to rule," he said. "We fought to remind everyone, including ourselves, that freedom means responsibility. When those who hold power forget that, someone must stand and remind them. That was our duty." The children listened in silence. Even the teachers were still. That moment would be remembered and replayed across thousands of worlds. becoming one of the most quoted lessons in galactic history. Meanwhile, out in the stars, Terran fleets still patrolled, not as conquerors, but as guardians. They escorted refugee ships, cleared debris fields, and maintained the peace. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. Every rescued vessel, every rebuilt station, every treaty signed was proof that the galaxy had finally learned to work together. The officers serving on those ships didn't think of themselves as soldiers anymore. They called themselves keepers. Their mission was not to dominate space, but to keep it safe. One young officer once said during an interview, "Our ancestors once dreamed of reaching the stars. Now that we're here, our job is to make sure no one loses that dream again." That quote spread across every communication network, printed on banners, displayed on school walls, engraved into monuments, because it captured the heart of what humanity had become. Still, there were reminders of the past. The ruins of the old Galactic Council headquarters remained standing, untouched. The Accord had decided to preserve it as a historical site, a reminder of what happens when pride and corruption take over responsibility. Visitors from all over the galaxy came to see it. The once grand chamber was silent now, covered in dust and light from broken windows. In the center stood the small metallic emblem, the symbol of Earth, still shining faintly under the sun. Guides would tell the story to every new group. This is where the Council gave its ultimatum. They demanded Earth submission, but instead they saw what true strength looks like, not in force, but in integrity. No one left that hall without feeling something deep, a sense of respect, even awe for what the Terrans had done. As the decades passed, humanity's influence grew not by design but by trust. Other species began to adopt their systems of education, justice, and science. Terran academies opened branches on distant worlds. Terran doctors helped eradicate entire diseases that had existed for centuries. Everywhere, the phrase Terran standard became the mark of quality, whether it was in engineering, medicine, or diplomacy. But even then, the humans never called themselves masters. They preferred another word, partners. They believed every world should rise together, and no one should ever again feel like a lesser part of the universe. Yet, even in peace, there were challenges. Not everyone agreed with the new way of life. There were whispers of old resentment among some who once held power during the Council era. They claimed the Accord had erased their traditions, that humanity's order had come at the cost of their freedom. The Emperor knew such voices would appear. During one meeting of the Accord, a delegate from a distant world stood up and accused Earth of soft domination, saying, "You have built your empire through kindness, but it is still an empire." The entire hall went silent. All eyes turned to the Emperor. He didn't respond immediately. He looked at the delegate calmly and said, "If kindness has become a weapon, then let the galaxy arm itself with compassion. We don't seek control. We seek balance. But you are free to choose another path, as long as it does not harm others." The delegate sat down slowly. There was no applause, no argument, just quiet understanding, because everyone in that room knew it was true. Over time, the Terran Empire, once feared, became something else entirely. It became trusted. Children from other species began learning human history as part of their own education. They studied Earth's long struggle, its wars, its mistakes, its lessons. They learned how humanity had nearly destroyed itself, and how it had chosen to rise instead. Those stories inspired a generation of leaders across the galaxy. They realized that peace was not a gift, but a discipline, something that needed to be worked for every day. And the humans led that example quietly, never boasting, never reminding others of their power. They didn't need to. The results spoke for themselves. Years turned into centuries. The Terran Emperor eventually passed away, peacefully surrounded by his people. His final words, recorded by the Accord historians, were simple. Power fades. Empires end. But if even one world remembers kindness as strength, then we have not lived in vain. His passing was mourned across thousands of systems. Entire planets held moments of silence. Ships dimmed their lights as they orbited their suns in tribute. It wasn't just the death of a ruler. It was the end of an era, the era of the first human who had taught the galaxy what real leadership meant. But humanity didn't stop. New leaders rose, not through bloodlines, but through merit. The accord continued, guided by the principles he had left behind: responsibility, fairness, and unity. 100 years later, a monument was built on the moon, a towering glass spire visible from Earth. At its base were inscribed words in every language spoken across the stars. To those who remembered what it means to care. Visitors from countless worlds came to see it. Some came in silence. Some brought flowers or small gifts. Some simply stood there, looking up at the endless stars reflected on the glass, knowing they were part of something bigger now. Something that had started with one decision, one moment when humanity refused to bow to injustice. That was the legacy of Earth. The galaxy had become what it always should have been: connected, balanced, alive. On a small colony world far beyond human space, a group of children once looked up at the sky and asked their teacher, "Who made the stars peaceful?" The teacher smiled and said, "No one made them peaceful. The humans just reminded us that we could be." And that answer spread quietly, becoming a story parents told their children at night. Because even when the names and empires fade, stories remain. Back on Earth, under the same blue sky that had watched humanity rise and fall for thousands of years, the people continued to live simply. They farmed, built, explored, and dreamed. They didn't think of themselves as rulers of the stars, just as one part of a great, shared existence. Their ships still left the planet every day, carrying explorers, scientists, and diplomats to worlds beyond imagination. But they always carried the same message: we come as friends. It was more than a motto. It was a promise. Centuries after the fall of the Galactic Council, a historian from another world wrote these words in a journal. The Council ruled through fear. Humanity ruled through example, and in doing so they proved that strength without compassion is only noise in the void, but compassion with strength. That is what makes the stars sing. Those words became the closing line of history books across the galaxy, because that was how it truly ended. Not with a war, not with a final battle, but with a quiet, lasting peace. And somewhere in the vast silence of space, among 1,000 shining stars, the spirit of the Terran Empire still lived. Not in ships or weapons, but in the hearts of all those who believed that doing good was the strongest power of all. Because in the end, when the Galactic Council tried to break humanity with their ultimatum, they didn't realize what they were awakening. They awakened a species that had been tempered by struggle, forged by history, and guided by conscience. And that conscience changed everything, not just for Earth, but for the entire universe.